an ill-fated acquisition that Quiksilver at the time made of the French iconic brand Rossignol was somewhat made out of hubris, somewhat made out of we can't do anything wrong as a business because we're on this huge growth trajectory. And ultimately that acquisition didn't prove to be successful as we all hoped it to be. And that obviously put the company under duress for quite some time after that. So I think what it ultimately taught me was sometimes it's never as good as you think it is. Alternatively, it's never as bad as you think it is. And it was really a lesson for me to stay humble, stay level set, don't get ahead of yourself because you're only one bad decision away from life being in a lot different position than what it was yesterday.
Today, I'm sitting down with Greg Healy. Greg spent more than 30 years inside the global surf and action sports industry. Much of that time with Quiksilver and Boardriders, leading across Asia Pacific, North America, and the EU. He's seen the full cycle, the growth years, the boardroom tension, Chapter 11, the rebuild, the acquisition of a competitor, and eventually the breakup of a global structure he helped strengthen. Before any of that, he was the youngest ever captain of an AFL football club in Australia, leading in front of 100,000 people before he ever walked into a board meeting. Greg doesn't speak like someone chasing the next title. He speaks like someone who's carried the weight. This conversation is about what happens when the balance sheet tightens, when founders plateau, when you have to project confidence you may not fully feel, and what keeps you going when you don't actually need to work anymore. Greg, welcome.
Thank you, Tony. Great to be here.
You were the youngest ever captain of your AFL club. To the American listeners, AFL is Australia's version of the NFL in terms of scale and passion. But the game itself is faster, more fluid, and played on a huge oval field. Leading in front of 100,000 people, when you think about that version of yourself, what did leadership feel like then?
Interesting question, Tony. It was probably something that came upon me a lot quicker than I dared to imagine when I was a young kid whose only dream and passion was to actually play one game of Australian rules football. I had an older brother who had also led the way. He's 6 years older than me, and he fulfilled his dream a number of years before me. So it was a great ambition of mine, and I could only pinch myself when I was leading a group of young men out onto the battlefield at one of the most famous arenas in Australia called the Melbourne Cricket Ground. And to hear the roars as we ran out and to be fulfilling that dream was something that I'll always cherish. Unfortunately, the result didn't go our way, but I often describe that week, the year, the month through the elimination finals leading up to it as one of the greatest highlights of my life.
You said football shaped you. What did it teach you about resilience that business later tested?
It certainly did shape me. The highs and lows of sport, in any sport, there can be only one winner. There can be only one loser. So to expect that every week you're going to come off the arena with a high, it's just not realistic. So you've got to learn to go with the flow, so to speak, enjoy and celebrate the wins, regroup after a loss, and get back on the horse, having the ultimate goal of ultimately holding up that silver cup at the end of each year, but not everyone can do it. And resilience comes in many forms: injuries, family life stress, teammate stress. I think it's just one of the great character traits that being involved in sport, in particular team sport, that I was able to transfer over into my business career.
You and Pierre, who we sadly lost a few years ago, were running profitable regions. North America was the problem child.
Yes.
You were vocal about it in board meetings. Then You were sent in to fix it. What changes when you go from critic to accountable?
Well, it's really time to step up, as in you've got to walk the walk. I, along with Pierre, as you quite rightly mentioned, were a critic of the performance of the American business. And we felt like it was dragging down the global business and therefore affecting the way I ran my region, Asia Pacific. Pierre ran his region, Europe. So we needed to fix it. And ultimately the board said, okay, if you guys want to fix it, here are the keys. And so that's when we knew it was game on.
When you landed in North America, what did you realize you hadn't understood from afar?
Well, I think every region has got its nuances. And one of the stark things that really came home to roost for me was that we were, as a company, and in particular, the North American business, under a lot of duress. And I don't think the leadership at the time had been as honest and open with the team in regards to the critical nature of the business. And so that was one thing that I really took upon myself with Pierre and really explaining to the team, our 1,800 staff that were in the North American office at that stage, just the current state of play.
Do you remember the moment that hit you?
There were a number of moments, and I think one of the real moments that I was worried that I might have bitten off more than I could chew, so to speak, was driving along the PCH, Pacific Coast Highway, from Laguna, where I was residing, up to Huntington Beach. I always used to take the PCH so I could see the ocean and just, be at peace with myself before I walked into the chaos at work. And at that stage, I thought, okay, I've walked into somewhat of a new culture, lots of new characters, still a question mark over who's this Aussie that's landed in our office, taking over our business to take us to the Holy Land a lot or not. And it was one of the few times, Tony, that I've actually thought, wow, Greg, you might have bitten off more than you can chew. But that thought probably lasted for 5 or 10 minutes. I picked myself up, dusted myself off, and got into the office and got on with business.
Well, to be honest, some of the videos I've seen you from the AFL, that's exactly what you're doing on the field too. Oaktree Capital tells you they love the brands.
Yes.
And they're taking you through chapter 11. You've called it scary and professionally rewarding and the best thing for business. That's not how most people describe bankruptcy. What did it teach you about balance sheet discipline?
Yeah, there's a number of points in there, and we did discuss the fact that it was professionally rewarding because I had exposure to Oaktree Capital, who were the best in the business. And as you quite rightly pointed out, they loved our brands. They believed in the management. But in their minds, there was just too much overhang of debt on the balance sheet. And we just couldn't get through it with that current debt stack, if you like. So I think how we got to that position is another story. But ultimately, we had to deal with the debt issue that we had on our balance sheet. And the mechanism that Oaktree recommended, and possibly the only way out, was via Chapter 11, which really gave us an opportunity to clean up the balance sheet, restructure the debt, go through a lot of painful restructuring in regards to closing of shops, right-sizing our workforce. But ultimately, it gave us a chance to reset and look to build a new strategy and a turnaround plan.
Oaktree Capital is obviously very well respected. When you all made the decision, was it purely economics, or were there other factors at play when you made the decision for Chapter 11?
I guess number of factors at play, but ultimately it comes down to your ability to service your creditors. And if we just didn't have that ability, the directors of the business had a fiduciary duty to file for Chapter 11. And that's the decision that the directors decided to take at the time.
What did it teach you about ego?
Teach me about ego. Well, I think it's one of the great lessons that I had out of that whole process was how we got here in the first place, how we got to this balance sheet overhang in the first place. And I think an ill-fated acquisition that Quiksilver at the time made of the French iconic brand Rossignol was somewhat made out of hubris, somewhat made out of we can't do anything wrong as a business because we're on this huge growth trajectory. And ultimately that acquisition didn't prove to be successful as we all hoped it to be. And that obviously put the company under duress for quite some time after that. So I think what it ultimately taught me was sometimes it's never as good as you think it is. Alternatively, it's never as bad as you think it is. And it was really a lesson for me to stay humble, stay level set, don't get ahead of yourself because you're only one bad decision away from life being in a lot different position than what it was yesterday.
For those who are listening, I'd rewind that statement. That is something we can all use when we're going through challenging times. It kind of reminds me of the cliche statement, when it's raining outside, it's going to stop. And when the sun goes down, it's going to come back up.
Yes. Yeah. And that's one of the phrases that I've always said to my team over the years, Tony, that the sun will come up tomorrow. We're only selling board shorts. And unfortunately, I was in that position to have to say that to my team a lot, but it's true.
Indeed. When you look back now, was that the turning point?
The Chapter 11 filing? Yeah, I think it gave the ability for the company and the brands to level set and really concentrate on what's important for the business and to grow in the right fashion rather than just for growth's sake. So when we worked with the Oaktree team in particular to what I would call lifelong friends now and colleagues, Dave Tanner and Tom Casarella from Oaktree, we really sat down and developed the strategic plan to turn around the business with Pierre, myself, and the rest of the executive team. And ultimately, we decided to take down the top line so that we could look to have quality growth rather than just growth for growth's sake to keep Wall Street happy. And being in a private company certainly allows you to do that. So within 2 years, I think we managed to take top line down by a certain percentage, but look to increase EBITDA, which we did by $90 million globally. So it was really a lesson in regards to, and a lesson that I'm more than proud and happy to say I learned from Tom and Dave in regards to it's just not all about top line, it's about quality growth and looking and questioning every dollar that you spend as a business.
Knowing that turning North America around was one of your most proudest moments, what actually unlocked the turnaround?
I think developing the team, but before that, developing the plan, working with what you believe at the time would be the key players within that team to help you turn the businesses around, because my leadership philosophy is you're only as good as your team. And the team needs to be believing in where we're going. And one of the things that I've really prided myself on and believe is critical to any team, successful team, is having a shared set of values, which will be our North Star in regards to how we behave as a team and as individuals. To answer your question, for the next 2 to 3 months, I really concentrated on, with Pierre and the Oaktree team, what's our plan? What are the values that we're going to hold ourselves accountable for? And what is the team that's going to help us take the business to where it needs to get to?
At what point did you feel momentum shift?
It was probably 12 months post-turnaround, settling the team. We had and I promised my team if we get this amount of increase in our forward order book, we'll go down and celebrate as a sales conference at Cabo. And at that stage, that was a long way off. We just let go, unfortunately, too many employees, which was heartbreaking, but had to be done. Our accounts were questioning whether Quiksilver, Roxy, DC would even be here, let alone get increase in order book. Our competitors were certainly making hay of the fact that Quiksilver had been run into ground, Roxy had no future, DC had no future for us. So for me to say to my team, hey, if we get 10% order growth, we're going to go down to Cabo and celebrate, that was a big step for the sales team in the organisation to believe. But they were made of the right stuff. They believed in the brand. They believed in where we were going. And we managed to get that order book in a positive territory and to go down to Cabo and celebrate that little win, which I think's so imperative, to celebrate your wins with your team and then raise the bar again. I think it was then in Cabo I realised we got a good chance. We're going to get this done.
I'd have to say Cabo is a wonderful place to go and celebrate.
Exactly.
And when you acquired Billabong, did that feel like validation or just another step in a long game?
Bit of both, Tony. I would say certainly validation that we turned around the Quiksilver business to the point that we could even discuss it and think it was achievable. So that was a big tick, I think, for Oaktree and the executive team and all the global employees at Quiksilver at that stage. There was a lot of heavy lifting done, not only in North American business, but Asia Pacific business and the European business to get the global entity back to that stage. Then to be able to go into a discussion with our fiercest competitor, and there was basically 3 majors within the global action sports / surf business, ourselves, Billabong and Rip Curl. For us to be in the position to acquire Billabong and fold it into the platform that we believed was the right platform to take action sports to the globe was no doubt a fulfilling thought process and something that we were all pretty proud of.
What was the most surprising thing about folding Billabong into Quiksilver?
I think the clash of cultures and personalities was pretty stark in some particular regions. And I'll say some particular regions because Billabong, like us, had 3 major entities around the world. Asia Pacific, which was centred in Australia, in Huntington Beach for the Americas, and down in Rossignol for Europe. But one of the things that I found was a big difference from my point of view anyway, that we at Quiksilver, in particular the region that I led, because I really believed it was foundational, I felt like we'd invested a lot in our people. I talk about that in regards to, the emotional intelligence side of the people and working with your teams and making each individual a better person. And I felt like to some degree that wasn't done on the Billabong side. And I only say that because when I put my Asia Pacific team together, we went off with the Billabong leadership team and some of my team. And it was a difficult time for all the leaders throughout both Billabong and Quiksilver side, because we had to be careful not to be playing favourites. We had to pick the best player for that position, which I think, credit to all of us, we did do that. And so I made some decisions around my leadership team for the Asia Pacific business at that stage and went off to an offsite. And the offsite was chaired by a great mate of mine, Ben Crow, who's very much in regards to leadership coaching and mentoring. And he has a great ability to disarm personalities within the room and really share emotions, life experiences. And we did that, and we had a lot of tears and a lot of laughs. But some of the Billabong team members came up to me after that and said it was one of the great days I've had in my corporate life, because we've never actually done that as an individual and as a team. And so from that moment on, I could really sense that we're all in this together and we were starting to bond and trust each other because we became vulnerable as individuals within the team. And so it was one thing that I've really, as I mentioned, prided myself on doing is having this trust and candor and vulnerability amongst team members. So you've really got each other's back.
That's pretty awesome that you brought Ben Crow into the offsite. And I've seen that firsthand myself too, where you have internal conflict or angst. But when you have the right person who can sort of shepherd or guide and educate, what you realize, at least what I've realized, is oftentimes that conflict is nothing more than communication style.
Yes, absolutely. And it wasn't even conflict at that stage. For us, it was more, I guess, more trust, because 2 weeks beforehand, a fellow or a young lady that I'm sitting next to was trying to kick me out of the best shop in Newport Beach. And now they're sitting along us, as in kick me out, as in the brand.
Yeah.
And now they're sitting along and they're saying, well, how can we work together? And it was a huge cultural shift for all of us to be huge competitors, trying to do whatever it takes to beat down that competitor, to now being partners and colleagues and teammates. And I think it's something that's underestimated throughout all corporate history in regards to takeovers are great on paper, but culturally, that's where they succeed or die.
There's a lesson in that too. One day you're fiercely fighting a competitor, and the next 2 weeks later, you're sitting on an offsite meeting trying to get to that kumbaya moment of team unity. During COVID, you were running Europe and Asia Pacific, which is morning calls, night calls, projecting confidence. You shared with me privately, unsure. You said you didn't believe half of what you were saying. How do you lead when you don't actually know?
It was one of the most challenging times I've had, Tony, as we discussed privately. I was actually down here because in Victoria, Australia, we were the most locked down, I think the most locked down city in the world. So I'd actually flown back from Europe to be with my family because world airlines were closing down. And so I got on a jet, got home, did my 2-week quarantine, locked up in a hotel, not being able to see anyone, and came down here to our ranch with the family. And so, as you pointed out, we had morning calls with my Asia Pacific team and evening calls with the French team. And I think globally, none of us really knew what the future was. And I'm not talking in regards to our business. I'm just talking the world at large. Like, where's this going to end? And if I bring it back to where we were at as a business, we weren't out of the woods by any means in regards to having a very healthy balance sheet that could carry negative cash flow for a number of months or years. We had 1,800, I think, stores closed. Landlords globally still demanding rent to be paid, which is a whole nother story that we can go into. And so it was a scary time. And to answer your question, the team needed someone to give them some confidence and belief that we're actually going to get through this. Now, I was looking to my mentors or partners as well, being the Oaktree leadership team, being Dave Tanner and Tom Casarella, saying, we're going to get through this. And I don't know if they were believing when they said, yeah, we're going to get through, but it gave me the confidence to say to my team, we just have got to keep focused, keep your teamwork up, keep your day-to-day job in line, just get it done, and we'll get through it. And as I mentioned to you, probably one day I believed it. The next day I was questioning whether that was right, but I knew for a fact, and it was confirmed with me sometime after it, that the team needed to hear that as I think I shared with you, one of the team members, our head of design for Billabong Women's, said to me, your coaches' talks every morning just got us through. We just needed to hear someone say, we're going to be right, keep on path, just keep doing what you're doing, and we'll get through, which we ultimately did.
Where's the line between reassurance and self-deception?
It's a really good question. I pride myself on being open, honest, sharing a hard message if there is a hard message to be shared. I think if you ask any of the people that have worked for me over a number of years, it's hard but fair. And when you're going through tough times, I think it's a leadership judgment call in regards to how much people need to know and how much you can share. Sometimes from a leadership point of view, you can't share everything. And sometimes there's certain factors, certain issues at play that, frankly, some of the team members don't need to be burdened with. And that's what leadership, in my mind, is about. There's certain burdens, certain responsibilities that you as a leader take on board that you don't need to burden with the rest of your team. And that's really just that's a judgment call.
Speaking of the burdens, what was it like managing Leases in 800 stores when they weren't operable?
It was really brutal. And Dave Tanner, who was the CEO at the time, made myself and Dave and Nate Smith, who'd taken my role in North America, renegotiate every single lease around the world. And it was brutal and it was time-consuming, heavy in the detail, but it was a great lesson for me that if Dave didn't push us to do that, maybe we wouldn't have got through. To the point where I clearly remember it was one of the biggest shops we had in Spain, and this is probably a year after COVID had finished and the world had opened up. I was still negotiating a lease because Dave didn't think we got close enough to a fair deal. And I was probably 6 months prior ready to say, hey, the deal's good enough, let's go. But no, let's keep going. So as I said, it was a great professional learning for me that devil's in the detail. There's always more you can do to better the business. And Dave was a great mentor for me in proving that to me.
I can see that. When you look back now and you had gotten back into Australia, you went through the quarantine, you said you and your family shacked up at the ranch. Looking back, what's the most positive memory you have of that time with your family?
Positive for me, it gave me the ability to rebuild all my fences on the ranch. But I think from a family unit perspective, I think it gave you the ability to share the emotions that as your wife and partner was going through, as your kids were going through, and not being able to just do daily routines that we all took for granted. Put the lunch in the lunchbox, send the kids off to school and have the kids have a good day at school and come home and you're parent again. And I do think that some of our kids globally really suffered from the lack of interaction that they had through those years that, a lot of the kids are growing and learning how to interact, learning how to make friendships, learning how to be resilient. So it's a really interesting time. And I think it's a time, particularly here in Victoria, that some of the kids still suffer through that lack of interaction with kids through those formative years of, say, 10 to 13 or 13 to 16. It's a real challenging time for them. So for us as a family unit, we really needed to be cognizant of that and just keep them on track when emotions were running pretty high.
That certainly is the case. Are those fences, are they still rebuilt? Did you do a good job?
They're still standing, mate, but the RSI in the elbow probably still hasn't recovered from all of that. But no, I mean, again, like, it's not always as bad as what you think it is. It's not always as good as what you think it is. I'm locked down on the farm or the ranch. Okay, I've got some spare time on my hands. How can I put this to a positive effect? And thus I built some fences.
I think there's a few of those stories that we've all experienced at some level also.
Exactly.
You've worked with founders who scaled into billion-dollar brands and others who plateaued. You said the best founders are courageous and courageous enough to let go. When does founder courage become founder ego?
Yes, it's a good question. I think firstly, let me address courage, because I think I've never been a founder. I've been blessed to be working for great founders and great brands that they've built. But I think and I say courage because you're really displaying your aesthetic, your creativity, and asking the world to buy in on it. And I think that's courageous. And where it becomes ego is, I think it's always one and the same for me, because to be courageous enough to start a brand like Quiksilver or Billabong or Rip Curl, you got to have some ego, because you've got to believe in yourself, what you're portraying to the public, asking the public to spend $50 on a board short because you've been silly enough to put some wall paint on a board short and put some zippers as the tie-up in the board short. And so that takes a fair amount of ego. I think where ego becomes a dirty word, if you like, is if you haven't got the ability to take feedback where it's coming from the right place, because the team that you've employed is helping you make your brand better. And the good leaders or the good founders will take that on board and act on it. Some of the leaders or founders that I've experienced don't take that on board, and the brand probably hasn't grown to what they would have aspired in the first place.
What's the signal it's time to bring in an operator?
I think when brands become to a certain scale where the creativity, the heat, the new kid on the block type scenario has got the business or the brand to a certain volume or certain place within a industry, where if the next step becomes mission critical, as in if you make a wrong step, it's going to put too much pressure on cash flow, on working capital. I think the ability for founders to understand that I am not in my wheelhouse here, I haven't got the expertise to make those decisions. Let's bring in some people that have got that expertise and can help me make the right decisions as I look to go into new channels or new geographies or new categories.
I actually own the Quiksilver coffee table book, The Mountain and the Wave.
Yes.
And I acquired the book before Marla and I did the international relocation down here. And during that period, I was buying every major book on surfing I could find. And that's a very interesting book to me, because when you flip through it, it feels less like a company story and more like a cultural moment. And when you see that and experienced that era captured like that, what comes back to you?
Yeah, it certainly was. I mean, I feel so blessed that I was fortunate enough to get the opportunity to join an iconic brand like Quiksilver in an iconic surf town like Torquay. And as we shared, I was a frustrated surfer growing up, bringing up kids in Melbourne, not being in the water as much as I wanted. So to be given the opportunity by the founder to join Quiksilver in 1998 as the CFO and just go along for the ride, pardon the pun, through a real growth heyday, if you like, not only with Quick, but also with Billabong and Rip Curl. It was just a pinch myself moment. And to look back on, that period we were having growth even in spite of ourselves. And we were on this cultural phenomenon that was just so much fun, traveling the world, our head office in Europe. If we had a global meeting there, we'd be in Val d'Isere, skiing, snowboarding with all these crazy crew that are running the business around the world. Surfing in Nicaragua for a board meeting. It was just a great time. But ultimately, the music stopped, and that's when we started earning our money.
There's a pocket inside that book with a DVD in it, but I don't own a DVD player.
Okay.
So at some point, I'm going to finish reading it by watching it.
Yeah.
You watched global structures get broken into regions.
Mm.
Wholesale channels locked up, vertical retail dominating. From your vantage point, what gets lost when a global brand fractures?
I think you've got to go back to the essence of what the brand really stands for. And we just touched on the cultural side of Quiksilver. And we built this global brand on the back of being culturally relevant, but also making sure that the product was on point and the marketing behind that was on point from a global perspective. We used to have a mantra being globally recognizable, locally relevant. And I think if a brand like Quiksilver and any of our other competitors get broken, I think the different messaging to the global audience is at threat, because particularly these days when kids live on phones 24/7, live on Instagram and the other social mediums. And if they're seeing different messaging coming from different parts or different influencers or different athletes, I think the global brand essence gets lost, and ultimately that can be dangerous for any brand.
Is the industry stronger today or just more financialized?
Depends how you classify stronger. I would think there's no doubt that there's strength from the Quiksilver Billabong side that's been diminished somewhat due to the fracturing of the business entity, if you like. But there's no doubt the brands will get through this and rebuild and continue on as global brands and great brands that they are. But I also think there's an underbelly of new, fresh brands that are starting to emerge that could one day be the next Billabong or the next Quiksilver. And I think that is a testament to the continued inspirational youth out there that want to portray great brands and can portray and build great aspirational brands. And if I look around what's happening in little hot beds like Byron Bay here in northern New South Wales of Australia, or down in Newport and Orange County and other parts of the Americas, there's still lots of brands that I would say gives us hope that there's strength in the area that are going to keep permeating and keep putting pressure on the global brands, that the big guys, if you like, the big three, the Quik, the Billabong and the Rip Curls.
Does a small brand have to be acquired based
Definitely
on? No. The reason I ask that question was we discussed that the brands, at least in Oz, also own the brick and mortar.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, smaller brands entering that market are at a great disadvantage.
Yes.
How does a small brand then enter a market that is to me sounds very difficult to enter when they're not owned by to get into the brick and mortar, when they're not owned by the master brand?
Yeah. No, it's a good question, Tony. Certainly Australia is a difficult market for an up-and-coming brand to get rack space in multi-brand stores right now, given that the old Boardriders entity owns one of the biggest channels, Surf, Dive and Ski. Rip Curl owns another big multi-brand channel called Osmosis. But there still is opportunity, and a lot of these up-and-coming brands have started their journey on direct e-com D2C. And so they're getting their brand in front of the consumer and owning that consumer through e-commerce, which is great. I think the next step is for them how they then take the next step into a different channel, i.e. is it wholesale? Is it multi-brand? Or is it their own bricks and mortar? And that's ultimately going to come down to questions around capital, how they want to put their capital into play. Have they got the ability to break through to some of the other wholesale channels, which there are? There's still some core wholesale channels that are scattered around the region. And I think Florence Marine is a great example that they've come into the market seemingly not looking to grow too quickly, but slowly seed themselves into some core shops besides the majors and really get that following on a small but gradual and healthy way. And I think that, to me, shows any small brand how they can enter the market down here in Oz.
Yeah. You know, the interesting thing about that part of our discussion we had a few weeks ago is I was thinking on some of the brands in the US in the cycling industry. And I'll use one for an example. It's public now. I've known about this for a little while. But the brands like Trek and Specialized and Giant, they began buying the independent retailers and branding them into their own shops. And I know that they've since pulled back from that model, while simultaneously, it's my understanding that Trek has reduced their workforce and laid off 30% of their employees. And it made me think back to our conversation if this strategy of the brands owning the brick and mortar is the right strategy, or does it have a lifespan?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and it's something we often grappled with. But ultimately, I think if you take your eye off the prize in best product, best marketing, no matter what channel you're in, you're going to suffer. And I think some of the acquisition over the years by us, as in Quiksilver and competitors, had been done for the wrong reason. Instead of taking a look within and saying, well, why aren't we growing with some of our wholesale accounts? Is it because our product's not on point? Is it because our marketing's not on point? And going back to our earlier conversation, did we have too much hubris or ego to think, to even question that our product wasn't right? And that's why we weren't going to grow with these wholesale accounts. Rather, we're just going to go and buy the wholesale account and stuff our product in there. But ultimately, and I think we've all suffered because of that as an industry. And it was a great learning for me, and I'm sure others in the industry, that the consumer is always right. And no matter what masthead you put on the bricks and mortar, if the product's not right and resonating with your consumer, you'll fail.
It's a very good point. You've said you don't need to work, but you want to. And that's different. What still pulls you forward?
Well, it depends on how you classify need. Financially, I don't need to work, but emotionally, I certainly do. And I guess, Tony, I'm 60 and a half. I still feel like I'm 30. As we discussed this morning, I'm a pretty obsessive trainer and like to keep fit. And I just feel like from a mental capacity and an emotional capacity, I need to feel the highs and lows. I need to have a team that I'm working with, and I just need that challenge. And I'm not ready to hang the boots up yet. And my wife will certainly reiterate this, because me being at home 24/7 is not what she signed up for either. So I think it works for both of us.
Yeah. Based on our previous conversations, you got a lot of horsepower still in there.
Yeah, and I enjoy the challenge, Tony. I know there's so much to life that I still haven't experienced, so many personalities that I still haven't experienced. Even just meeting you over the last month, it's just been a great connection, and I just know that there's so much more to get after in this life.
I agree. If the title doesn't matter anymore, what does?
I think success and self-fulfillment and helping others achieve what I've been fortunate to achieve. And I think that last point is something that I'm pretty passionate about. I've been speaking to a number of startups and other smaller brands down here in Oz, and there's just so much great energy and passion and dreaming from people within the community who have come across a good idea and just need some help in regards to me sharing with them all the mistakes I've made so that they don't make the same mistakes, or all the success that I've managed to have in certain areas to point them in the right direction. And I think if I can do anything, sharing some of those experiences with these new up and coming brands, even older brands who are looking to grow into Europe or the Americas, that's what I'm pretty passionate about. And that's what I enjoy doing right now.
Mm-hmm. When a business hits turbulence, where do you look first?
To your team. And I think when it is turbulent times, all the investment that you put into the team and their teams underneath them really holds you in good stead. Unfortunately, been in those positions where I've had to rely on that investment in the teams over the years. And I think it's really rewarding when things are tough and you look at your team and you can see the commitment, you can see the dedication, and you can see the belief that we're going to get through this because we trust each other. We've done the homework. We know what needs to be done. I think that's just so powerful.
If a founder listening today is sitting at 30 million and stuck, what would you tell them to confront?
Why are they stuck? Is it product? Is it people? Is it passion? Is it the want to take risk? I think there's a number of questions that you'd need to ask yourself. And if it's product, that's easily fixed. If it's people, there's other people out there that can help them get to where they need to get to. And that's not to say that the people that are with that founder right now aren't good for the business in the current state, but there's certain skill sets and experiences that can get you to 30 million, but the next 100 is probably where you need to bring in some other skill sets. So there's lots of questions that you'd need to go through, I would have thought.
Yeah, I see that frequently. And sometimes that's why these brands approach me. And if someone's about to expand globally, what did they underestimate?
Cultural nuances, for sure. Even practically managing time, like the inability to jump on and talk to your colleague in New York because it's 4 a.m. in the morning that you would have taken for granted if you're just working between Queensland and New South Wales, if you like. I think cultural nuances is probably the biggest one that you'd really need to be aware of, and everything that goes along with that. And in particular, Europe, I would have thought the difference, and I'm talking from an Australian perspective, and probably when you, from an American perspective, looking to go into Europe, the cultural differences there as well. And even within Europe, I found, and I think I mentioned this to you, I'd been going to France for 30 years and called that my second home, and having the call to go over there and lead that business. Even the cultural nuances between Spain, between Germany, between the French, between the British, until you're actually in that seat, you don't realise that the French have got a certain view on the British and the British have got a certain view on the French and vice versa. I think that's a real challenge.
Interestingly enough, a search that I've just completed for an Australian brand, when I first met the founder and the CEO, I was concerned about the time. And what really transpired after that was almost an ideal matchup of time where, like right now, it's 4 p.m. for me, it's 9 a.m. for you. Mm-hmm. And I found that my production before our standing meetings was perfectly aligned for them when they wake up and they're ready to meet with me. They've got all the information they need and we're ready for our next meeting. Yeah. And it hasn't been like that with China. It's even sometimes difficult on a 3-hour spread in the US, but That was a surprising thing. I didn't realize it actually worked out, I think, to everyone's benefit.
Well, you were lucky, but it worked against me for a number of years, Tony, because when you're having leadership meetings between the West Coast USA, Southwest France and Australia, it often meant that I was up at 4 a.m. doing that weekly call. But my French friends were doing a 9 p.m. call with a glass of red in their hand, so I'd rather the 4 a.m. call.
You were going the other direction. Yeah, I can see that from that perspective.
Yeah.
You've lived the full cycle. When you zoom out, what are you most proud of?
I was really proud of my first 10 or 15 year tenure with growing the Asia Pacific business, particularly with two of my great colleagues and friends, my initial CEO, Clive Fitz, and my great mate and partner in crime, as I describe him, Craig Pin Stevenson. The business we built in Asia Pacific was something that I'll always cherish. And the ability and the opportunity to become great friends with the founders of Quiksilver. But from a professional point of view, I think the proudest moment for me was what I did in America with the team and the ability to turn that around and level set and give the brand the opportunity to grow again and to live again. One of the mantras that, as I mentioned, Clive and Craig, we built early days in Quiksilver was giving the brand the opportunity and leave it in a position that it's in a healthy state for our children's children. And that's something that we'd written on, the office walls and what have you, and in the welcoming pact, and it's something I really believe in. So for me to be able to get over to the Americas, and again, not just me, but work with a committed and great team and level set and give the great brand of Quiksilver Roxy and DC at that stage the ability to go again is something I'm very proud of.
If your kids watch this one day, what do you hope they understand about how you led?
I'd like them to understand that I led by example and I led a team-based approach. I led with a team-based approach, as in you can't do it by yourself. You're only as good as the team behind you. And you've got to be resilient because it's not a one-way trajectory up. In fact, there's probably more downs than there is ups, but you just got to keep, as we spoke about, the sun will always come up the next day. And you just got to keep on keeping on. And so I think to answer your question, I think from my kids' perspective, you can't replace hard work, you can't replace commitment, and you can't replace self-belief, but you got to have support. And I've been very fortunate to have great teams around me for a long, long time.
I hope they get a chance to listen to this. And when you think about the next chapter, what kind of team do you want to build one more time?
A team that's got passion, that want to win, that share my values. And I think that's super important because you got to have a shared belief around what's important in life, and that's personally and corporately. And a team that actually cares and will be there with you for the good and bad times, celebrate the wins, give each other a hug when we have a loss, but get up the next day and do it again.
Greg, you've lived the full cycle: growth, stress, rebuild, consolidation. And what strikes me is not the titles, it's the steadiness through all of it. I appreciate your honesty today. There's a lot in here that operators can learn from. Thank you for sharing it.
It's been a pleasure, Tony, and thanks for walking me down memory lane. It's been great.
My pleasure.